Hey everybody, this is Ryan McClanahan with HistoryThroughCards.com. I hope you're all doing very well today. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and a Happy Festivus for the rest of us. So, 2024 was a really good year for me personally when it comes to cardboard, and I wanted to really kind of open up a few packs. It's been about 30 years since I opened up a pack of baseball cards, and I've already done a couple of videos of me opening up packs that are going back now 40 some odd years. 1981 Don Russ, and in 1986 Don Russ as well. And Don Russ was one of my favorite manufacturers in the 1980s, primarily because of the design. And so one thing I kind of noticed in the Dead Tree media, trying to gather some information about uh, cards and what the hobby was like in the 1980s, was that Flair and Don Russ had broken Topps monopoly in 1980, and by 1981 they had a mad dash to try to get out sets for that year, and they didn't have a whole lot of time to do this, so there were a lot of errors, and with these errors came a lot of speculators, and you see this a lot in the Dead Tree media, where where just they're raising the prices for these sets from the 1980s, and this is really kind of primarily, I think, why we see a lot of cards that are just becoming more and more unaffordable or unattainable. And it's not necessarily these cards. Now, these cards were going up in value substantially, but not to the likes of, say, 1952 Topps baseball, or like any set from the 1950s or 60s. That was a different story. There were speculators that were dabbling in vintage back in the 1980s, but it was mostly like my father's generation, where they had remembered and collected cards from the 1950s, and then whatever happened, their mothers or my grandmother would throw out my dad's collection, and then like my dad's generation would go and they'd graduate college and start families again, and once their kids started to grow up like me, I was probably like 5, 6, 7 years old. My father would take me to the card shop, and so all these baby boomers, they would go to card shops and they would buy like vintage or cards that they remembered of the players that they saw growing up, and this is generational. This this is one of the reasons why I'm showing you 1984 Flair here, because it's now 40 years ago, and I remember these cards, although I wasn't really able to collect these particular sets. I think particularly 1984 Flair, I really couldn't get my hands on them because they were so expensive, and it's kind of interesting now that I'm a lot older, that I'm going back to buy the cards from my youth that I couldn't afford in the 1980s and even in the 1990s. Now, if you guys have been following my channel for any length of time, you know that I stopped collecting modern cards in 1994 and I switched over to vintage, and I've been happy as a clam ever since. Those vintage cards are not really part of my childhood. I kind of take that back. In a weird way, they kind of are, because I started when I was 14. Actually, I think I may have dabbled in vintage at age 12, which would be kind of highly unusual. In fact, even seeing a teenager collect vintage in the 1990s was a little on the unusual side. So a lot of my friends would collect the modern cards, or the cards that we grew up with in the 1980s. And the one thing I had noticed, and I had talked about this in one of my videos prior, I think it was a 1986 Don Russ video, and you guys can go back and check that out. But it said in one of the articles that I had read that Don Russ, between 1980, I want to say 84, and 1987, were really difficult for dealers to get their hands on. And they thought that the company was intentionally short printing their sets. And what they were actually doing was they were only printing the amount or number of sets that they had issued the year previously. And so that's where the short print comes in. And you actually can see that in the PSA or population reports, that there are a lot less cards that are being sent in or issued from those years, from say like 1984 through 87, and then they ramp it up in 1988, and it all went downhill from there. But this article also mentioned that Fleer was doing this as well, and I actually agree with that, because I really didn't see a whole lot of Fleer cards back then, and if I did, they were really expensive, and I couldn't get my hands on any. So I was primarily a Don Russ collector and a Topps collector as well. Topps has a really amazing history behind it, and so does Fleer and Don Russ actually. It's not really well studied, Fleer's history in the hobby or card production, but it actually goes back to 1923 when it comes to baseball cards, and they actually had strip cards, and some of these strip cards that have stamps on the back of it, which would say Frank H. Fleer. And that lawsuit too, by the way, I'm going to get into that in greater detail. But I also wanted to go through some of the economics of the Fleer set here from 1984, and show you. In fact, everybody knows that Don Mattingly has a 84 Don Russ rookie, which is still very popular, even 40 years after it was issued. And it's popular not just with my generation, but with generations that followed me. So I really kind of wish that he gets in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, I think he deserves it. I think he's got a really solid case. But also you have, in 1984, you have the update set, and that has Kirby Puckett. He's not in this regular set. As you can tell here too, this was not cheap by any stretch. $12. So I only bought one pack. But Doc Gooden, he's in the update, so he's not going to be in this. I do have another Doc Gooden card that I purchased. I actually have a 1988 Fleer Doc Gooden that's autographed, and they came out with a headliners set in 1987 or 88, and actually I think both years. So I've been actually trying to complete an autographed subset, and I'm only missing two of those cards: the Don Mattingly autographed and Mark McGwire. And I think it's a really neat set, and I figured, it's like only 6 cards. So anyway, I'll get into that in a different video, I think. But again, I like that design. And as I said, you do have a couple of rookie cards and second year cards in here too. And Doc Gooden is also in the Fleer update set as well. Darryl Strawberry is also in this set, and I think he also has another image in the update, but I could be wrong. Both those guys were really, really fantastic in 1984. Doc Gooden, obviously, Rookie of the Year, and I believe he was also the Cy Young Award winner that year as well. And if those guys actually didn't mess with the nose candy, they'd be in the Hall of Fame right now, and we'd not even question that. I still seem to think that Doc Gooden has still has a case to be made for the Hall of Fame. I think he actually could get in there. We just saw Dave Parker get in the Hall of Fame, and he had a serious drug issue as well. I know Tim Raines, he's also in the Hall of Fame, and he had an issue with cocaine as well, and he actually went to rehab, and he hadn't touched it afterwards. So it worked for him. It doesn't work for everybody, and I know Doc Gooden has had some serious issues. Even in recent times with the nose candy and getting into trouble with the law. So I wish him all the best, and I really think that he would be a very decent candidate. He could have been so much more, except for the drugs. Same with Darryl Strawberry. And also, I'm not entirely sure if he's in this set, but Oral Hershiser, his rookie year was 1984, and I think he would be a very decent Hall of Famer as well. And, a lot of people would say, like, no, these guys don't belong in the Hall of Fame because of XYZ, or they don't have the stats. But stats are only half of the equation here when they're looking at Hall of Fame worthy candidates. Stats on one side, but then they also look at, what did the player contribute to the teams that they played on and baseball in general. So I think that's something that we might want to kind of keep in mind. The other thing too, as I'm looking at this pack here, back in the 1980s, there was two serious problems, actually three if you consider how we stored these cards. But that's another story. There was a problem with the wax pack itself, and today I know we call them wax packs, but that technically, I think the last true wax pack came out in 1992. You guys can correct me on that if you want in the comment section below. But the one huge thing I think that I can remember specifically is that dealers would actually they'd tear open or unseal the pack itself, pull out the cards, and sometimes they would I know this for a fact, they would insert other cards as well. And so I actually did witness that on a few occasions at my local card shop back in the day. So that became a huge concern for a lot of dealers and collectors alike. Actually, not so much the dealers, but the collectors. They had a huge problem with this, and I'm going to try to find an article or two if I can. I'm not entirely sure if Beckett ever actually said anything about that. So there was another issue also that I remember, and that was the counterfeiting that was going on in the 1980s, specifically with Cal Ripken Jr.'s Topps Traded and Mario Lemieux's rookie as well from 1985. Those were huge counterfeits. And I even believe that Frank Thomas's 1990 Leaf was also counterfeit too. And in certain Beckett's, it specifically says, beware of Frank Thomas counterfeit cards. I was a really nice card, and I was never able to get my mitts on it, and until recently, in fact. And so one of the reasons why I'm going after some of these cards from the 1980s and early 90s is because I couldn't afford them when I was a kid. All it takes is time and a little bit of reserve money. And while I'm on to that subject here, I want to get into the financial aspects of the 1984 Fleer because I think it's really kind of interesting. So the minimum wage in 1984 was $3.34 per hour, and that's the 2024 equivalent of $10.14. Now what I have here, if you guys can see this is the April 1985 Beckett, and I have a near complete run. This is the one that I chose to show you guys. These actually are not the easiest things to come across today. The Beckett's there's two Beckett's in 1984. So Beckett Monthly came out in November of '84. So I believe there's I think that's right, November. I'll have to double check. So they originally did a reprint of the 1984 Beckett in 2001, and that's the one that I have. I don't have the original, and that's honestly that's fine by me. Uh, I just don't want to pay over $100 for one of these things because it just doesn't make any sense. And unfortunately, a lot of magazines and Beckett's and price guides, uh, they're not easy to sell. So, and I'm not going to sell my Beckett collection. I really think it's great for research. So Beckett was a really innovative magazine during its formative years, and it served to mainstream a lot of the prices that we see. And I think it got a lot of its ideas from Baseball Cards magazine from the very early 80s. Baseball Cards magazine is hardly ever talked about today. I'll, I'll probably go through that magazine, but for now, I just wanted to show you guys something. And again, a lot of people say that Beckett is it's a shell of itself, and you know, it's really kind of too bad. Mismanagement can happen in any company, and a good manager can do wonders for any kind of company, especially a publishing company. So we'll have to see what happens to Beckett in the future. And I know the owner is going to prison, so and on different charges than I think money laundering, which is always fun. Anyway, so one thing that Jim Beckett did really well was his survey participation. So he would send out surveys to a lot of the dealers throughout the country. He would get them back, and then through a mathematical formula, figure out what these cards are actually going for. And maybe in certain cases they were going for a lot more than what was in the magazine here. But this is really kind of interesting too, because he has a condition guide, which I think he did a really good job at. And a lot of other Beckett's later on showed you exactly how you should price your cards based on the condition with photos. And that wasn't actually something new. That was first started by Baseball Cards magazine in the spring of 1981. But Beckett had a greater reach. So a lot of people think that Beckett was the first one to do that, but they weren't. So this is actually a really interesting magazine all on its own. Darryl Strawberry, he's actually listed right here as a rookie with a, is it a rookie? He's not entirely sure, I guess, which is because there's an extended, and Beckett did have the XRC, which I was always confused at. I always thought that the player's first photo was his rookie, and maybe Victor Roman can tell you guys more on that. I think he's kind of the expert on this. It gets a little fuzzy though, because I think Victor, he may start out at say 1968 or 69, when Marvin Miller becomes the head of the players union, and he is the one who really started the player contracts between Topps and Major League Baseball, and he did a really great job. Now, whether or not that Miller actually belongs in the Hall of Fame is a different story altogether. But he's a controversial but probably necessary person in baseball history. So he actually he might actually be warranted for Hall of Fame, and he's been in now for a long time. He probably should have gotten in when he was still alive, but that's a different story. So also here, Beckett first started out with the baseball card price guide Sport Americana, as you can see right here, and he actually shows us the first one from 1978. And he's got a pretty good write-up here, I think. But uh, I actually have a number of these. The thing is with these is that as a kid, these were really expensive. They were almost $10 as far as I remember. And so, like, if you were gonna get one, it was very rare. And even Beckett. So this Beckett right here cost, let's see, $2.50. That doesn't seem like a whole lot, but when you're making $3.34 an hour in 1984, that or 85, that can be something. So, uh, this again, don't worry, I'll get to the 1984 flare, guys. But I just want to show you something really quickly. So, 1948 Bowman here. These prices, if you guys can see these prices, they seem to be really, really cheap. You have a Stan Musial rookie for $55 to $77. And again, you have to put into perspective here. What were people making in 1984 or 1985? And then what was the condition and all this other stuff? And, if, you know, again, it also probably depended, too, on other factors. No, I can't actually imagine that these things were going off the shelf like left and right every week for a dealer to come up with certain, I guess, standard prices, right? So I'm not entirely sure how many of these particular cards were being sold on a monthly basis for Dr. Beckett to come up with them, but he did, and it may or may not be an accurate price. I'm not entirely sure. Back in 1984, 85, you could buy a 1933 Gaudi Babe Ruth. It didn't matter which one, for $60. And I have heard some stories from older collectors that in fact had happened. Even T206 Ty Cobbs. And I can tell you right now that when I first started out into vintage in 1994, 95, that I could get superstar players really cheap, far cheaper than what we're paying today for these cards. Whether or not they're overinflated or what, I'm not entirely sure. I actually do believe that they are. One of the things here that I'm really kind of concerned about, and I've been concerned about this for a while, the arrows, the up and down arrows that you can see here. I tend to think that these arrows have contributed to a lot of collectors thinking that the hobby is a stock market based on the down and up arrows that we see here. And they certainly seem to treat it like it has been, and that's been like that since I was a kid. And I think this is one of the first magazines here, or the first years for Beckett, that actually have these down and up arrows. And so, the hobby is fun. For me personally, this is my childhood memories, and the prices in it reflect, I believe, what these cards were going for when these players were playing. Obviously it's different now, and I'm going to show you that. So if you're looking at the prices for modern players today, and they're still playing, those prices are they're not going to be that price in the future. I believe that they're going to go down in value in the next 20 to 30 years, because obviously those guys are, if they're not getting in the Hall of Fame, no one's really going to be collecting their cards. Now, this is also interesting too, because 1954 Red Heart, it's a very popular set, by the way, and these are not that they're not that I shouldn't say they're not that expensive now, because they kind of are, but and we don't know if the prices being paid now are inflated. I seem to think that they are. But you don't really see the 1954 Red Heart being listed in Beckett. Same with, let me see if the Topps doubleheader. Well, let me see. There you go. There's the Topps doubleheader. You don't see that often in Beckett magazines going forward. And 19, sorry guys. So 1963 Flair right here. That's another one too. Those cards are actually pretty cheap for a different reason. Because the 63 Topps really was a very commanding set back then. Far more than the 63 Flair because they were a shorter set. So in the 1980s, you definitely saw a boom in card prices, and that started about 1981 or so. And like I said, you have a lot of speculators. So here's the whoops. Let me see. No, that's not what I want. The 84 Donruss. As you can see, that's $25 for the set. At its peak, I believe that was a $350 set, and now you can get it for about $125. I actually had to go and buy the set for, I think I bought it for $125, and it was missing 2 cards, which I have not replaced. It's one of my favorite sets of the 1980s. And then over here, we have the 84 Flair, and that's going for $15.15. What's really interesting here is Juan Samuel rookie, $2. I don't know who Juan Samuel is. Let me see. Yeah, so I don't know who he is. I've never heard of him. And then you have Don Mattingly, and that's going for, let's see, $2.50. There actually could have been a spike in his prices. He was a very, very popular ball player back in the 1980s, especially around 84, 85, 86. And you guys can see his stats. But I seem to think that collectors are paying a lot more for that card than that. And if you could find his rookie card, that is. All right, so I want to show you something really quickly in this August 1995 Beckett here with Frank Thomas. And, just really quickly, I know that was a great set. That's a really neat card set right here. And I haven't seen them since, but I did have a few of those. I don't know if they're collected widely, but they were for my generation. So anyway, the 1984 Donruss set right here, as you can see, that's a $225 set back in 1995. And right next to it is the 1984 Flair, which is $100. And so these cards, they really did go up substantially in price, as you can see here. But again, a lot of these players are kind of like winding down their careers as well, and a few of them are actually probably in the Hall of Fame at this point, or starting to get in the Hall of Fame. So here's more of the 1984 Flair. And you can see that Don Mattingly is $30 at that point. And then Ryan Sandberg $10. And I know Ryan Sandberg just he announced that he has his cancer has come back and it's spread to other organs. And I wish him the very best. And I hope he makes a full recovery. And same with Wade Boggs as well. It's really tough. It says Wade Boggs here was an American League was a batting champion in 1984, so that's really interesting. And then the Flair update here, as you can see, Kirby Puckett rookie is that $300. So that's still a very expensive card to this day. And Jimmy Key, $32 going down. I remember Jimmy Key. That's interesting. Um, and then Roger Clemens, 275. And as you guys can see here, these cards are XRC. So I don't know if Dr. Beckett knew exactly what to do with that. Uh, so yeah, I don't know if Dr. Beckett knew exactly what to do with that. But it's a $650 set. I don't really see these cards often, so I think this is really interesting here. Yeah. Let's see. Doc Gooden, $12. Okay, so as you guys can see there, that's a very expensive set. The Flair update. So let me open this up, and as I kind of told you guys in the past, I'm not entirely sure that it's worth opening up packs. I do have some serious reservations about opening up vintage packs to begin with. I have seen a few videos of what's his name, Jeff Wilson, opening up a 1967 Topps pack, and that was kind of disastrous, I think, on his part, because I don't think he knew all the ball players that he should have, and then he opened up a 1980 Topps pack from a Kmart box, and that seemed to be even more of a disaster, and that actually got a lot of people very angry, because these were players that he should have known, and players that were in the Hall of Fame, and he bypassed. That just all that should have kind of told him afterwards is, I need to do a lot more research. So I'm not gonna pretend to know all the ball players from the early 1980s because I was a young kid, but I know enough of them, and I did follow baseball pretty religiously back then. We only got to see American League teams, and for the most part, the National Leaguers, you could either follow through Beckett or through the newspapers, which I did, at least I tried to. So, it's different when you're only following one ball club. You get to follow them on a almost day-to-day basis, where today you have interleague play, and I believe you've had interleague play now since like the late 1990s, but I could be wrong. At the time, I was not a fan of interleague play, but sometimes it's just the best way to see players that you've never seen before. So when I was growing up in the 80s and the 90s, the only way that I would see a player who was in the National League was basically on a card or through the newspaper. And again, too, like I I don't like the fact that a lot of these vintage packs are being opened now. It's a lot different when it comes to packs from like the 1980s in or 90s, because there's enough of them. But the further you go back, the rarer the pack is, and then uh, you're just at that point you're just gambling, and that's all it is. It's not really about the game or the ball player or the history of the hobby or the history of the sport. It's all about the break and the money, and that's it. And this is a longer conversation, but um, you know, I don't like gambling to begin with. If you guys want to gamble, I'm not going to tell you not to. I have seen some horror stories firsthand, specifically with the 2004 National, and I'll tell you guys about that in another video. But that 2004 National was in Atlantic City, and I actually I'll tell you right now. Then I was at a bar, and a buddy of mine I was with, he went to go get another drink, and so I was at the table, and I see this wife, and she's being greeted by her husband who's coming back from wherever, and he says to her, "Well, I just lost the kids' education funds," and he had lost $40,000. So again, like, gambling is really a really destructive thing, and I think for the breakers, uh, I think they're gonna have to be regulated at some point. And I hate regulation for the most part. I think if you deregulate a lot of aspects of our society, I think you'll do okay. But certain things you do have to regulate. And I've talked about the Hobbies Act of 1973, and that might actually have to fit into sports cards and memorabilia at some point. I think they might have to amend that act to include breaks, because I really don't want to see any minors getting in trouble. And honestly, like, I think Dustin from the Sports Card Dad, he had, I think, mentioned something in one of his recent videos where all it's going to take is some mother to write to their legislature to say that little Jimmy bought into a break for like $1,000 or something stupid like that, and only came back with like $12 or something to that effect, where like the legislatures are gonna say like you need to provide like a photo ID or something like that to prove your age, and I'm fine with that. I am. As an adult, if you want to get into a break, that's fine. You know what you're getting into, and you know what the consequences are, the pros and the cons to doing that. So anyway, the pros and the cons of opening up a pack of 1984. So there is no gum in these packs. They got rid of that in 1981 because Flair had to go back to court, and I believe they lost their case in appeals. So there's no gum in anything after 1981. So I'll go through that case again at some point. Anyway, let's get into this. I've actually never opened up any of these packs for the most part, the Flair. So this already, I'm loving this already. There's something about opening up a pack of cards, but see, this is stuck. I don't know if you guys can see, this is stuck right here. This is one of the problems with opening up wax that's 40 years old. And even if I actually, when I was opening up that pack of 1981 Don Russ, there was a stick of gum that was on the cards, and it just would not come off. I actually gave those cards, the gum cards, to a gentleman who watches my channel here, and you guys can see this right here. Just, yeah, but oh man, look at this. So you know what, I like the back of that. I think that's cool. That was really cool. All right, and we have the Brewers when they were in the American League. So I'm sure there's somebody out there who doesn't know that the Brewers were an American League team. And I found out something also really interesting, that they stole the design and the colors from the Seattle Pilots when Seattle was in the league in 1969. So I thought that was really interesting. That's really cool. And again, I really like the design of their logo here. And you just saw Jesse Orosco there. That guy's been around. So that's pretty cool. All right. Yeah, really neat. All right. Jesse Orosco. He's been around forever. And again, I don't know if he's Hall of Fame worthy, but do you guys do you guys like the design of the '84 Flair? Uh, I I kind of do, and I kind of don't. I, I'm I'm 50-50, I think, on the design. But this is it smells yeah, it smells like a new car. You guys know that new car smell? That's what this smells like in a way. New cardboard smell. So it's really, and don't hold the cards like I'm holding them now. And do not do as I do. All right. And Bobby Brown. Now I really like the design of that San Diego Padres jersey. I think that's pretty cool, and I really like the logo as well. And the Padres got into the World Series in 1984 against the Detroit Tigers. And if you guys have not seen the World Series on YouTube, I highly recommend that you do so. It is fantastic, and this is really funny too. The player in the background there has no shirt on, and that kind of reminds me. Um, Duke Snyder had told me once that the um, the uniforms that he was wearing in the 1940s and 50s were usually made out of wool, and they were so hot that they would you would have like at least an extra 10 pounds of like sweat in them, so that they usually didn't wear their uniforms when they were practicing, especially in spring training. So I didn't know that. Their uniforms are not like what they are now. I forget exactly what the uniform today is made out of, but I know that there's a lot of problems with the uniforms they're having now. But I really like this uniform. So oh, the other thing too about the San Diego Padres is that Ray Kroc. So the other thing that I also kind of forgot about here, Ray Kroc owned the team back then, and if you guys haven't seen the movie The Founder, that's a really interesting movie. And Ray Kroc, well, he wasn't really the founder of McDonald's, but he bought out the McDonald's brothers, and he turned it into what we know it today. So I really kind of thought that was very interesting that he actually owned the team, and unfortunately he did pass away in 1984. But I guess to make up for it, the team went to the World Series, and it's a really fascinating World Series. I really enjoyed that. All right, here we have Roy Smalley, and I know his father was also a baseball player as well. Let me see what it says on the back. Yeah, the son of Roy Smalley Jr., who was an infielder with the Chicago Cubs. And he's got a couple of Bowman cards out there, and he autographed a lot of his cards. He's really easy. He was a really easy ball player to get autographed. And you guys can find his cards. Roy Smalley Jr., that is, not the gentleman here. Then we have Ben Ovi. Definitely have seen this guy. I really do enjoy the jersey here. I know a lot of ball players did have problems with those jerseys back then. John Butcher. I do not remember this guy at all, but I think that's a really interesting jersey. And I think maybe too, the jerseys were like a representation of the era in which the player was playing. And same with the cards as well. Although the 1984 Flair here, they don't. It's not overt 1980s, if that makes any sense. There's certain styles and designs that definitely tell you when the card was issued, but I don't get that sense with the 1984 flair here. And Ozzy Virgil, that is really cool. Um, this is obviously spring training, but it's really cool, and that P, that design, is really cool. And I always liked the Philadelphia Phillies history. I thought it was interesting. And initially, the Phillies were from Massachusetts. They were the Ruby Redlegs from Worcester, Mass, and they moved in 1883. Floyd Rayford. And I'll tell you something really interesting. That cardinal right there, I believe that's from 1956. That's the only year that they have, I believe, a cardinal on the side of the sleeve. Chet Lemon. Yes, this is really cool. This is really, really cool. I like this card quite a bit. And I remember Chet Lemon very well. That's awesome. Um, if you guys can see that on the top there, on this side right here, that's that's not like that's not like gum or anything, obviously. Uh, I wonder I wonder if that was a problem for a lot of these cards. I don't know. This is my the first time I'm ever opening up a pack of these, so I don't know. But Chet Lemon's really really good ball player, I thought. And then Dan Drayson, I don't know who that is, but the logo is cool. Let me see in the back here. Usually it'll tell you. That's the one really good thing about the backs of these cards. I really like these because it does give you a lot of information. And I know a lot of collectors, they got into math and statistics because of the backs of baseball cards, because they read the backs of baseball cards. And then we have Brett and Perry as Gaylord Perry and George Brett. That is a really cool card. I was a huge fan of George Brett. I still am. I think everybody should own George Brett's rookie. Now, he actually has two rookie cards, if you guys can believe that. He's got the 1975 Topps, which is an amazing card, but it's usually found off center. One thing I'm looking at these cards here is that the centering is actually really, really good. And George Brett also has a 1975 SS PC as well, and it's really cheap, but it's a really neat card. But yeah, 1985, George Brett had that famous bat incident with the tar was above a certain point, and it was a home run, and they declared it not a home run in the end, and I don't think it did a whole lot at the time. It probably meant more at the time when that incident was occurring. But the Royals did win the World Series in 1985, and then Gaylord Perry there. I'm not entirely sure. He was a guy who I think he threw a spitball quite often, and they were always looking for something where he doctored the ball, and I don't think they ever caught him. But that's really interesting, and they got the bat here too. This is 1984, so obviously, I'm not sure exactly what is going on here, but it says here on the back, July 24th, 1983 game in Yankee Stadium between the Yankees and the Kansas City Royals. So I was wrong. That incident occurred in 1983, not 1985. That is that is my bad. But this is telling you exactly what happened here, which is really cool. Um, yeah, yeah, that's really cool. I, the pine tar incident. That is a really neat piece of history right here. I really like that. So, and I'm sure it's not a very valuable card. All right, that's my clock. It's I have a Super Mario clock that goes off at this time every day, and I just yeah. Sorry about that, guys. Again, Gary Lucas. So what I think I showed you before was the spring training jersey, but I could be wrong. But again, I do really like the jersey that the San Diego Padres had, and they had a really neat jersey in the late '80s and early '90s too. Okay, guys, you're gonna love this. Oh, look at that, Pete Rose. Oh my God, that is that is awesome. 1984. Didn't he go to the Expos in 1984? I do remember when he got his was it his 4,000th hit uh as an Expo. This is really interesting here, and let me see what it says. Yeah, so it's got 83 stats, but it shows you all the stats from 1962 and then 1963. I have a lot of his cards, and his autograph is it's easier to find than a pigeon in a park. It really is. He signed everything. Unfortunately, he did pass away this year, a couple months back, and I did see him in June, and he looked fine. But your health can be gone in a flash, guys. That's why I always say eat healthy and exercise on a regular basis, even though it may suck. Uh, but he really did have a very interesting life. And I don't know about his chances for Hall of Fame, or even if he should be there. Um, but again, I really like this card. That is cool. And again, so far I'm seeing a lot of near mint cards that are really perfectly centered in this set. All right. I don't I don't know who this is, but the jersey is really cool. The Royals have a very interesting history or story in the 1980s, because as it appears that they were the originators of the Pittsburgh drug trials in the 1984-85 seasons, and I believe that started in about 1982. But I'm going to do a deep dive into that. But I do actually have a card of a Royals player that I am going to do a video on. I don't want to ruin it here. All right. So that's a really cool card. That's a really neat. And then the Mets logo down there. That's a really cool logo. There we go. There's the back. And that photo up there, that's pretty cool. That's really cool. I like that. It's a nice touch. And then the last card, again, I'm not entirely sure who this is. There's not a whole lot of pictures, I think, from the 1980s that I really recall, other than say like Nolan Ryan. Obviously, I saw plenty of him. All right, so one of the problems with buying and collecting packs from, say, like especially the 1980s, I would say, is that the value there? Not likely. You really kind of have to be a true collector, I think, in order to do what I just did. So, what I would say, if you want to break packs from the 1980s, they are getting a little on the expensive side. Not necessarily tops, but obviously like Don Russ. Uh, I did see some 85 Don Russ that I think were like $25 a pack, and then Flair from 85. I wanted to like try to grab a pack or two of 85 Flair and then like 83 Flair, and it was just it didn't make sense at all, especially when you can buy the sets. Uh, and probably cheaper actually at this point. And one of the reasons why a lot of these cards are actually cheaper today than when they were when I was a kid collecting them actively is because the players are either dead, they went on to the Field of Dreams like Ricky Henderson has just done, and they're not being collected or traded or sold actively on a weekly basis. So, uh, you know, it's really primarily, I think, maybe my generation that is going after these particular sets and cards, and maybe that the Hall of Famers are going being bought and sold for the most part. Um, and I did actually purchase a couple of Hall of Famers from the early 1980s to mid 1980s because they are my memories. So I don't know if collectors who are like say 30 or younger are actually buying and selling cards from the 1980s like my generation is. So I don't really think that it's economically feasible to be buying packs of 84 Flair or a lot of the packs from the 1980s just to open. They actually might be worth more if you keep them in pack form, unopened, if you will. Just because, like, $12, I didn't get $12 from this pack. And I got Pete Rose, is one of the biggest stars, I think. Um, and he's not even in the Hall of Fame. So, from an economic standpoint, I don't think it's really worth it. I opened up this pack because, again, it's been 30 years since I've opened up a pack, and it instantly brought me back to when I was a kid. So they are my memories specifically, and uh, that's generational too. That's just not with my generation, Generation X. Every generation kind of like goes through the same thing. They start to buy or sell cards and sets that they grew up with, and you know, there was a video that Dustin from the Sports Card Dad had showed everybody, and I never had seen this before, but he had showed this, and it was from 1990. It was a documentary from 1990 about the hobby, and the dealers back then were wondering why kids back in the 1980s why they were only collecting cards like this and they weren't going for the 1950s stuff. Well, that's actually easy to see why, because they didn't grow up with it. There's no institutional memory there for those kids. The only reason why they would know Mickey Mantle or any of the Yankees from the 50s, Yogi Berra or whatever, is because their fathers or grandfathers or uncles had told them who they were. In my case, I grew up with stories about a lot of the guys from like the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and sometimes even 1920s through my family members who saw them play. So that's the only reason why. I also recall a set I think it was called All Time Greats, and I had seen these and I was like, who are these players? I had no idea who they were. I was curious though, to find out more about the players on those all-time greats cards. And so when I got old enough, I started to try to research more and more about those guys like Bill Terry and Bill Dickey, Bob Feller. I knew Bob Feller for years, and so I was actually very lucky in that respect, that I did get to meet and talk to a lot of those players who played in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s. And so, I wasn't doing it for the money at all. And I would suggest you guys, if you're going to collect cards like this, don't do it for the money, because it's still not there for the most part. But anyway, guys, I'm going to leave it there for right now. I do have a few other packs that I did pick up from different years. So I will be opening up a few more packs and just kind of like sharing my recollections. I don't have an article for today, though, from 1984. I think I already went through a few. But I will be sharing a few more pack openings and some articles and kind of sharing my recollections of the 1980s. 1984 was also a very, very good year for music as well, and one of my favorite years for music. Van Halen came out in '84, one of my favorite bands of all time. I swear, if I go deaf, it's going to be because I listened to too much Van Halen. But yeah, '84 was a great year for music, and the clothing style, not so much, but also movies as well. I don't recall seeing any movies in 1984. 83 I did, different aspect. But anyway, guys, I go off on a tangent like this all the time. The 1980s was a great decade to grow up in, and maybe I'm biased because I did grow up in that decade, and I know there are collectors here who don't have any memory of it because they weren't born yet. But you can still enjoy the 1980s through sports cards and the music and the movies. Just don't wear any clothes from the 1980s. That might be a problem. But anyway, guys, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for stopping by. I greatly appreciate it, as always. And let me know what you think in the comment section below. I always love to hear what you guys have to say. And until the next time, I will talk to you later. Have a good one. Bye.